Our next topic is picking soybean varieties for disease tolerance. But Darren, this is one of the things I talk about all the time. Hey, if you fix drainage, you use a good seed treatment, and you have great fertility in your soil, why do we need that great disease tolerance?
Well, I'll tell you this, Brian. There are a lot of games being played out in the seed industry today. There are companies that are trying to get your business. They want to get on your farm. And if you have a disease issue, they'll say, oh, you picked the wrong variety. You shouldn't buy from them. You should buy from us. We've got a lot better tolerance. This is the solution, when in reality, it might be a foliar fungicide program, or it may be drainage or something else that will really solve that issue.
Yeah, the big thing I always tell people is, you know what? If you really have a major disease issue, you can only pick from a handful of varieties. If you have a lot of the things fixed in your soil, you have your drainage taken care of, all of a sudden you can pick from 50 different varieties. You've got a lot better chance for high yield. But nevertheless, today we want to talk about picking the right variety for different disease issues. So Darren, let's start with iron deficiency chlorosis.
All right, if you've got high pH areas out in your farm, maybe those areas have high levels of carbonates, maybe those areas have high levels of nitrates. Whatever the case may be, you may see a yellow flash in your soybeans, you may see iron deficiency chlorosis. So the seed companies have a pretty good handle on which varieties can tolerate those types of situations and continue growing. Because let's face it, you're giving up yield in those areas. You're not going to reach 100% of your maximum yield potential out there. You're giving up yield. The question is, are the beans going to die? You don't want beans that are going to die. You want beans that are going to live. So here's a great situation where you may choose two varieties for your field and use a planter that can plant two different varieties out there. You make a map, you go out in those poor areas where you've got iron deficiency chlorosis, address them with drainage, address them with your fertility program, do all the right things, but then plant that variety that can be tolerant for that, and then use your racehorse variety on the good areas of the field.
Soybean white mold, that's a big issue around the country. Unfortunately, there are no varieties that have complete resistance to soybean white mold. So what we would suggest is look at certain varieties that may be a little bit more tolerant than others. Yes, we would suggest you look at all the other methods to stop white mold. For example, planting a little thinner population, wider rows, using Cobra, using Domark, or other fungicides foliar.
Okay, well here's the thing, Brian. With white mold, there's one of the major soybean breeding companies that dedicated a researcher that was his whole job, was just look at Sclerotinia white mold tolerance in soybean varieties, and he found two varieties that are pretty good. They're the best things that we've ever seen on the market. They're not completely resistant, but they have a high level of tolerance. Look for some of these varieties to expand throughout the market. Right now, there's just a couple of varieties out there at all. They're in the late group 1 maturity range and only offered by a few seed companies at this point, but there'll be more to come. The thing that breeders are looking at, though, is more upright branching. When you look at your soybean varieties in your field, are the branches upright or are the branches out and kind of laying down? And if you have lodging, that's another thing to really watch out for. If you've got a variety that tends to lay over or lean quite a bit, that's a good sign that you've got a better chance of getting white mold in your field. So find something with great standability and upright branching if you can.
All right, let's go to a little rapid fire here, Darren. Phytophthora, what do we do?
Well, there's a great new trait. It's the RPS3A gene. That's what you want. And also look for the 3A plus 1K or 1C stacks. It's the best thing we've had against Phytophthora yet.
How about sudden death syndrome?
Sudden death syndrome tolerance is really improving. We don't have complete resistance yet, but the seed companies are getting great data each year because sudden death is becoming more of a problem. So there's a lot of things you can change culturally and crop rotation wise to help you, but then do look at that sudden death syndrome rating. It's very important.
How about brown stem rot?
Well, brown stem rot is really critical, especially in the northern U.S. when you're doing continuous soybeans. That's a disease that a lot of times gets misdiagnosed as SDS. So the way you can tell in your field is split the stem open. If it's got brown in the pith, it's brown stem rot. If the pith is white, there's a good chance that it's sudden death syndrome. And of course, you can send them into a lab at your local university to get it tested for sure.
You mentioned continuous soybeans. Anything else you're thinking about other than brown stem rot in those continuous beans?
One last comment on brown stem rot. There are truly resistant varieties out there. So pick a resistant variety if you've got that. And then when we're looking at continuous soybeans, you just have to look at soybean cyst nematode tolerance, or if you're in the south, root knot nematode, because that is going to show up if you're planting beans there every year.
All right, so back 20 years ago, you probably weren't thinking a lot about diseases and overall disease tolerance in soybeans. Today, as you can see, this is a big issue.
We didn't even talk about stem canker. We didn't talk about charcoal root rot. I mean, there's all kinds of problems out there, but The good thing is we can manage them. Again, if we get the drainage right, we have less disease issue. Then we look at fertility, especially the micronutrients like we've been talking about, very important.
Use a good seed treatment.
Yep. Seed treatment. Hey, seed treatment is one of the things you can't cut out on your farm this year. It just is one of those things you have to have.
Well, you might, but the problem with seed treatment is some years you get no gain, but other years you get the home run. You gain 5 or 10 bushels.
Not with the seed investment that we're putting in. If we're spending $50, $60, $70, $80 an acre on soybean seed, we can't afford to skip putting that fungicide treatment, especially on the seed.
All right, well, just talk to your seed provider. When it comes to all these different things for disease tolerance, there are a lot of good options for you today.
There are also good options to control our weed of the week. We'll share them with you coming up next.